This woman's husband allows her to cheat with other men. However, each time she cheats, there are horrifying consequences that would eventually leave her wishing she had never become his wife. Vic Allen, a young electronic engineer, returns to his lavish house after a ride around his usual cycling trail. His gorgeous wife, Melinda, is sitting near the house's entrance, seemingly lost in her thoughts. He asks her what she is thinking about, but she brushes the question off and heads inside. The scene then shifts to several weeks ago, where we are introduced to the couple's young daughter, Trixie. The husband and wife are currently waiting for a babysitter to arrive, as they are headed out for a party. Melinda goes to the bedroom and asks her husband to help her choose a dress. Vic obliges, picks up a beautiful black gown for her, and even helps put on her heels. Everything about this family looks quaint and normal on the surface. Shortly afterwards, they arrive at their friend's mansion where a glitzy party is in full swing. The couple help themselves to little food and mix with their friends for a while. Melinda, who has had a few glasses of booze, starts to wander around on her own. She soon sees her friend, a tall, gorgeous man named Joel Nash, and gives him a tight hug. Then the two of them head to the backyard of the mansion, away from the other guests. Vic, who has been watching this, goes to the back window and sees his wife kissing Joel. He seems agitated about this, but slips away from the window without saying anything. However, Melinda's flirtatious attitude is not a new or a private topic to their close friends. One of such friends, Mary, approaches Vic and inquires about his wife's new date. The latter responds casually, pointing out that he doesn't interfere with her matters. Suddenly, Mary's husband, Grant, arrives at the spot and informs them that an extremely drunk Melinda is currently grabbing a lot of attention in the main hall. Vic then makes way to the front of the mansion, only to see that his wife has climbed on top of a piano. She dances for a while but soon comes down and begins playing a tune. Melinda then starts singing and the entire crowd of guests join her. Sometime later, Vic is alone in one corner of the party when he is suddenly joined by Joel. The young man thanks Vic for allowing him to have a close relationship with Melinda. Vic, who appears extremely calm on the surface, reminds Joel that Melinda had also previously dated a man named Martin McCrae. However, one day, Martin disappeared without any news and has never been seen again. Vic claims that he killed Martin because the latter was getting too close to his wife. Upon seeing the frightened look on Joel's face, Vic then clarifies that what he said was just a joke. Joel, however, is unnerved by the conversation and quickly leaves the party. On their way home from the party, Melinda inquires why Joel left so suddenly after talking to him. Vic lies to her and pretends he has no idea what she is talking about. Once they are home, Melinda quickly heads to the bedroom while Vic goes to the cottage in the backyard where he keeps and farms snails. He watches the snails reproduce as a way to refresh his mind from all the problems in his life. The next morning during breakfast, Vic guides his daughter who is engrossed in her science project. Melinda remarks that one day Trixie will become a bomb maker like her father. The little girl corrects her mother, pointing out that her father makes electronic chips and not bombs. It is revealed that Vic used to work for a weapons manufacturing company and designed a chip that is currently used in unmanned drones. After having made sufficient money from his design, Vic retired early and now spends most of his days at home. Moments later, he drops his daughter at her school, where he meets one of his old friends, Kelly Wilson. She jokingly calls him a murderer before revealing that the news of the conversation between Vic and Joel has spread widely in the community. In fact, his close friends also begin to question Vic about the whole incident. Grant says it is better for Vic to control his own wife than to threaten Joel with such dangerous jokes. Meanwhile, after returning home, Vic realizes that his joke has also reached Melinda's ears. She is extremely angry and says it is inappropriate for Vic to make jokes about the disappearance of her close friend, Martin McCrae. She has also invited Joel to dinner at their house and asks Vic to apologize for his previous attitude. That night, Joel arrives at the mansion and is warmly greeted by Vic. They are soon joined by Melinda, and the trio sit down for a lively dinner along with Trixie. Things start on a friendly note, and everything seems to be going amicably. However, the atmosphere becomes awkward when Vic and Melinda start insinuating things to each other. Melinda says that her husband should have behaved more normally towards Joel. Vic then fires back immediately and points out her hypocrisy. He says that if Melinda really wanted to see him behave normally, then she would have never invited Joel for dinner. Eventually, Melinda orders their daughter to go to bed and asks Vic to tell Trixie a bedtime story. It is obvious that Melinda wants to have some private time with Joel, and doesn't want her husband to interfere. Unfortunately, moments after putting Trixie to bed, Vic sees his wife making out with Joel downstairs. The expression in face clearly shows that he is unhappy with their behavior. Following this, Joel heads downstairs and knowingly drops a plate in the sink. A heavily intoxicated Melinda hears the noise and arrives in the kitchen. She grabs a glass of water and hands it to her husband before heading to the bathroom. Vic takes this opportunity and approaches Joel, who also appears to be slightly drunk. The husband appears friendly and initially apologizes for the joke he had made before. But he quickly changes his tone and goes back to telling the story about how he cruelly killed Martin by hitting him over the head with a hammer. Vic then subtly threatens Joel to leave their house immediately. A few days later, Vic and his family are invited to a charity event where they meet Kelly's husband, Don Wilson. He is a noir author who writes novels about conspiracy theories. The guests begin to chat with each other, and Don asks what Vic does for a living. The latter gives a vague answer, but then other people present there quickly reveal that he makes chips for military drones. This description is enough for Don to realize who he is talking to. In fact, he refers to Vic as the bomb maker and says that he has heard rumors that Vic killed Martin McRae. A collective groan can be heard from others, and Grant explains that those rumors are not true. Everyone present at the event is sure that such a nasty hoax started after Vic made a simple joke a few days ago. Later, during the event's ball session, Vic does something that he normally wouldn't. He asks Don's wife and his old friend Kelly Wilson for a dance. The latter immediately agrees and the duo make their way to the center. Everyone, including Melinda, watches in astonishment as Vic shows off some dance moves with Kelly. On their way home after the event, Melinda begins to get jealous and she asks if her husband finds Kelly Wilson attractive. Vic says Kelly is a beautiful woman and also a very warm person to chat with. Melinda, however, interrupts him and asks if he wants to sleep with Kelly. When her husband doesn't give an outright straight answer, Melinda's jealousy finally boils over. She wants to prove that she is the most attractive woman in his life, and no one else can satisfy him physically as she does. Melinda begins to fondle her husband's body and slowly slides her hand down to his crotch, making Vic moan. She then gives him oral pleasure, but Vic says he is finding it hard to concentrate on the road. In response, Melinda says that she would be willing to die in the car rather than hearing her husband talk about other women. This passionate session of lovemaking continues from the car and goes straight to the bedroom. The next day, the husband and wife are in Trixie's school, attending a kids' soccer match. Everything seems to have returned to normal until Vic suddenly gets a call on his cell phone from a bank employee. The person informs that his wife has made a money transfer of $3,000 to a man named Charles Delisle. According to information from the bank, Melinda sent a check to pay for private piano lessons. After learning about this, Vic immediately goes to his office to find out who exactly is Charles Delisle. He calls every major event management place and finally manages to locate the stranger. Vic then heads to the restaurant where Charles works as a part-time pianist. However, when he reaches the destination, his suspicions are confirmed. He sees Melinda in the restaurant, flirtatiously watching Charles. It is obvious that the pianist is his wife's new hookup partner. A disappointed Vic returns home and is shocked to find Melinda's wedding ring lying in the sink. He, however, cannot ponder on this topic for long as he suddenly hears the TV from the living room. A news program reports that Martin McRae has been found dead with a gunshot wound to the head. That night, when Melinda returns home drunk, Vic breaks this news to her. She is shocked and runs upstairs to her room, leaving her husband alone. The next morning, Vic and Trixie visit a pet rescue center where they adopt a small puppy. They are happily returning home when Vic suddenly sees Charles walking on the street, carrying a bunch of flowers. Sometime later, when the family sits down for supper, the same flowers are placed on the dining table. It is obvious that Charles had given them to Melinda. Things go from bad to worse when a few days later, Melinda doesn't return home for the night. Vic anxiously confronts her the next morning when she arrives extremely hungover. He inquires where she was last night, and also about the money she had paid to someone named Charles. Vic's patience seems to have run out as he lashes out with harsh words. In fact, he orders Melinda to stop meeting up with her new affair. On the other hand, Melinda gets turned on by her husband's sudden anger. She even encourages him to push her down to the ground and make love to her. Vic is in no mood to do that and warns her not to meet any more men. A few days pass by normally until Vic and Melinda are invited to yet another party by their close friends. It turns out Charles is performing a musical number for the gathered guests. The young musician does have great skills and makes everyone dance to his tunes. However, Vic is not amused at all and looks very upset with the whole thing. Hours go by and the party continues until midnight as the guests get drunk as well as high on marijuana. Vic eventually spots Melinda accompanying Charles toward the swimming pool. She shamelessly hugs and gets intimate with the young musician in front of the remaining guests. The night rolls on and all the remaining guests are in the pool when suddenly it starts raining. Melinda is still enjoying her new affair, but she is forced to leave Charlie alone when soon one of her friends calls her in. One by one, all the guests start going indoors, leaving only Vic and Charles outside. When everyone has left the pool, Vic slowly approaches Charles with a hateful face. He releases all his pent-up frustration and forcibly dunks Charles's head underwater, eventually drowning the musician. After ending Charles's life, Vic rejoins the other guests indoors and continues chatting like nothing happened. Sometime later, Melinda tries to look for Charles in every room of the house, but doesn't find him anywhere. She finally goes to the balcony and, to her utter horror, sees Charles's lifeless body floating in the pool. Immediately, everyone rushes out to help Charles, including Vic himself. They quickly lift him up but realize that the young man has already passed away. Soon enough, the police arrive at the scene and start investigating the case. They question everyone, and Melinda doesn't hesitate to accuse Vic of murdering the musician. However, other people don't seem to argue with that and say Vic was indoors with them. There is no sufficient evidence of any foul play, and the police finally decide that the incident was purely an accident. Following this incident, Vic returns to his normal life and gets back to cycling around his usual trail. He, however, begins to realize that a strange gray car is always watching him from a distance. One morning, when Vic is at his daughter's school, Kelly comes up to him and reveals some shocking information. Kelly says that her husband, Don, often invites Melinda to their house to discuss whether Vic killed the young musician. Vic, on the other hand, doesn't seem to be fazed by this at all. In fact, he invited both Kelly and Don to his house for dinner. That night, after a hearty meal, Vic takes Don to his snail farmhouse. He then respectfully asks Don to stop suspecting him of killing people. The latter remains firm in his stance and says he has a feeling that Vic is not as gentlemanly as he appears to be. The next day, after dropping Trixie off at school, Vic sees the gray car parked at a nearby restaurant. He takes a closer look inside and is surprised to see a camera kept inside in the car. It is now beyond doubt that the owner of the car has been watching him all along. Enraged at this, Vic decides to enter the restaurant only to see Melinda chatting with a middle-aged man. He joins them, much to Melinda's surprise, and presents his charming side to the stranger. The two have a conversation, and Vic concludes that Melinda definitely hired this man to spy on him. Therefore, he leaves the restaurant, and sometime later, he barges into Don Wilson's house during lunchtime. Vic confronts Don in front of his wife, and even shows proof of the money transfer that Melinda had made to his account. Vic then storms out of the house, leaving Kelly infuriated at her husband. Things go from bad to worse for Vic, as while returning home, he sees his wife with her latest lover. That night, while Vic is bathing his daughter, Trixie asks a seemingly innocent question about Charles's death. The kid says she knows her father was behind the drowning. Vic doesn't deny her suggestion, and instead asks her to keep the matter a secret. The next day, Melinda invites her new affair to the house for dinner. It turns out that the man is not a newcomer in her life, but rather her ex-boyfriend, Tony. Melinda, who still suspects her husband of murdering her last lover, begins to act more and more shamelessly. She even reveals that Tony was the first American she slept with. However, Tony is not as obnoxious as Melinda's two previous lovers, as he seems reluctant to talk about their past relationship openly. He tries to divert the discussion by suggesting that they should have snails for dinner. Melinda casually says her husband has a whole farm of snails in the backyard. Tony happily says they can pick a few from the farm, and he can cook them a nice dinner. But this suggestion doesn't sit well with Vic, who makes it clear that the snails are not for eating. He also makes it clear that snails have toxins in their intestines and can kill people if not properly cleaned before eating. Gradually, the awkward night passes on, and Melinda goes back to her shameless self. She drinks, flirts, and eventually takes Tony up to her bedroom. Vic watches from the window as the new guy begins to strip his wife. A few days later, Vic follows Tony and asks him to come check out an area of land that he could develop. Vic lures the unsuspecting Tony by saying that Melinda is waiting for them at the spot. On the way, Vic begins to drive erratically, and it is obvious that his intentions are not good at all. He eventually takes Tony to a George, which falls on his regular cycling trail. There is no phone network in the place, and obviously Melinda is also not waiting for them. Before a confused Tony can make sense of what's happening, Vic slams his head with a huge stone. The latter slips into the George and falls several meters below where his head slams on sharp rock. After making sure Tony is dead, Vic stuffs his pockets with rocks and sends Tony's body to the bottom of the river. He then returns home and joins his family like nothing happened at all. A few days later, the whole family goes for a picnic at the same spot. The husband and wife seem to have found a new spark in their marriage and get touchy with each other. However, right before returning back home, Vic notices that Tony's body has floated up to the surface. On their way back, Melinda says she forgot her scarf, and Vic offers to go back and get it for her. He leaves his wife and kids at home and returns to the George, where Tony's body is currently stuck on a rock near the top of the water. Unfortunately for Vic, as he tries to sink it again, Don arrives at the spot and catches him in the act. Back at home, Melinda goes into Vic's snail shed and finds Tony's wallet inside a jar. She immediately realizes that her husband has killed her latest lover. This seems to be the final straw, and she begins to pack a bag to leave. But when she goes to the bathroom, Trixie grabs the bag and throws it in the swimming pool outside. The kid makes it clear that she doesn't want to leave her father. Back at the George, Don desperately tries to escape as he speeds off in his car out of the woods. Vic, who knows this trail like the back of his hand, follows on his bike. He takes a shortcut and manages to intercept Don, who swerves out of the way. Don's unable to get his vehicle under control and drives straight over the cliff edge to his death. This is when the movie circles back to the first scene as Vic returns home to see Melinda waiting for him. He appears extremely calm and asks Melinda what she is thinking. The latter brushes off the question, smiles at her husband, and heads inside.